Let's walk through how to connect a React application to Nhost, an open source Firebase alternative with GraphQL. At the end of this video, you will have a full stack application up and running that you could use for your own project in less than 20 minutes. Hey everyone, welcome to the AlterClass channel. My name is Greg. I'm a software engineer and the founder of AlterClass.io, a brand new online course platform for tech educators. So if you got skills and want to make a living selling technical courses online, look no further and visit AlterClass.io. All right. So recently I discovered a new backend as a service provider called Nhost. It provides a lot of backend services out of the box, such as PostgreSQL database, a GraphQL API, authentication, serverless functions, and much more. So I decided to walk you through how to use it with React to show you how easy it is to create a full stack application. All right, so let's get started. First, make sure to create an account on Nhost.io. Once your account is created, go to your Nhost dashboard. Here we are going to create our first Nhost application. So click on create your first app. Then give your app a name, my Nhost app for example. Then select a region where Nhost will host your backend services and pick the location that makes sense for your application. Here I'm going to stick with Frankfurt, Germany. Then select the pricing plan. And for the purpose of this video, I'm going to choose the starter plan, which is free and has enough resources for the application we are going to build. And finally, click create app. So now Nhost is provisioning our application with all the backend services. All right, once your application has been successfully created, copy the backend URL of your Nhost application because we're gonna need it inside our React projects to connect to our Nhost backend. Next, open the terminal as we are going to create a new React app using the create React app CLI. Give your application a name and use the -- template flag to leverage the Nhost quickstart template I've created for this tutorial. So we don't have to start from scratch because it already includes all the components and pages that we'll need for our application, so that we can start right away working on integrating Nhost with our application. All right, it may take a few seconds, but once it's done, you can then cd into your directory and run the development server. Once your application is up and running, open your browser at localhost 3000. And if everything is working fine, you should already see the application display on the screen. So you have a dashboard with a header and a user menu. You have a profile page. You also have a page to allow users to sign up into your application and another page to log in into the application once you already have a user account. All right, so now open your favorite code editor and let's take a look at what we have here. So as you can see, we have a components folders with a bunch of components already implemented here. We also have a few pages components, one for the dashboard, one for the profile, the signing, and the sign up page. And finally, we have a few CSS modules that are used throughout the application to style our user interface. Now, if you look at the app.js file, you can see that all the routes are already configured using React Router. All right, now that everything is in place, let's configure Nhost with our React project. So to work with Nhost from within our React app, we'll use the React SDK provided by Nhost. It's a wrapper around the Nhost JavaScript SDK that they also provide, and it gives us a way to interact with our Nhost backend using React hooks. So you can install the Nhost SDK with npm install Nhost React and also install the GraphQL library. Next, open the app.js file and at the top of your file import the Nhost client and the Nhost React provider from the Nhost React SDK. Then we can instantiate a new Nhost client and link it to our Nhost project that we have created earlier. Note that here I'm using an environment variable to get the backend URL of our Nhost project. And finally, wrap all your JSX inside the Nhost React provider by passing as an argument your Nhost client. Next, make sure to create a new environment variable inside the .env.local file and paste your Nhost backend URL. Now save your file and don't forget to restart your React server to load your new environment variable. Alright, that's it for the configuration. Now let's build the application and add authentication. So we're gonna start by implementing the signup process first. For that, we'll use the use signup email password hook provided by the Nhost React SDK. So make sure to import it at the top of your signup component and then call it from inside your component. This hook returns the method to sign up users, along with a few variables to check the status of the authentication process. Then inside the handle onSubmit function, which is called by the form inside our JSX, call the signup email password returned by the hook, pass the email and password state variable inside it, and an extra option parameter to add the display name, which is composed of the first and last name of the user, and then some extra information about our user. Here, we're just storing the first name and last name of the user. But feel free to add any data you need here, depending on the business logic of your project. Then we're gonna check if the authentication is successful. If yes, we redirect the user to the home page, which is the dashboard, using the navigate component from React Router. And we create a variable to check if we need to disable the form because the authentication is loading, or if the user needs to verify his email address before being able to log in into the application. And then display a message on the screen if the users need to verify his email address after submitting the form, or by default display the signing form. Then inside the form, make sure to disable all the inputs and the button using the disable form variable we defined above. You can also change the button text depending on the authentication status, if it's loading or not. Finally, below the submit button, display an error message if something goes wrong. Alright, now let's open the sign in component to allow existing user to sign in with email and password. For that, once again, we will use the Nhost React SDK and the hook name use signing email password. So start by importing it at the top, along with the navigate component from React Router. And then inside your signing component, call the use signing email password hook. This React hook returns the method to sign in the user and a bunch of variables to check the authentication status. The same variables that we have seen with the signup hook. So as before, inside the handle onSubmit function, call the sign-in email password method and pass in the email and password of the user using the corresponding state variable. If the authentication is successful, redirect the user to the home page. And again, create a disable form variable to check if we need to disable our form or not, depending on the authentication status. Then inside your JSX, display the signing form by default, or just a message to the user if he needs to verify his email address to complete the authentication process. Then use the disable form variable to disable the inputs and the submit button. You can also update the button state and display an error message below it in case something goes wrong. Alright, now that we can sign up and sign in into the application, let's allow the user to sign out from the app. So open the layout component, and again we're going to use the Nhost React SDK to import the use sign out hook. Call this hook inside the component and retrieve the sign out method from the result, and then use it inside the menu items array, which represent all the buttons the user can click from the user's menu on his dashboard. Now that we have implemented the authentication, we can easily decide who can access certain parts of our application. In our case, we only allow authenticated users to have access to the dashboard, so the /routes and the /profile routes. All the other users should be redirected to the signing page if they try to access those routes. To do so, we can create a wrapper component called protected routes. So make sure to create this component inside your components folder. By default, this component is going to return the children prop. Make sure to import the corresponding styles, the use authentication status from the Nhost React SDK, and the navigate component and the use location hook from React router, and also import the spinner component. Next, inside the protected route component, call the use authentication status to retrieve two variables. The first one is the is authenticated variable to check if the user is authenticated or not. And the second one is the is loading variable, which allows us to check if we're still waiting for the result. Then call the use location hook to get the current location. Then in case we're still waiting for the authentication status, just render the spinner into the screen. And once we have the results, we can check if the user is authenticated or not. And if not, we redirect him to the signing page. Otherwise, we let the user access the page he's looking for by returning the children prop. Now open your app.js file so we can use that component. Import it at the top of your file, and then inside your JSX, wrap the layout component inside the protected route. That way, all the children route, the dashboard and the profile route will be protected by this component. All right, now let's take a look at our application and try this out. So here I'm on the signing page, and if I try to access the home page, and as you can see, I'm automatically redirected to the signing page. In other words, I can't access the dashboard if I'm not logged in. So let's go to the sign up page and create an account first. So I'm going to enter my first and last name and email address and create a password. And then I submit the form. And here, before being able to log in, I need to verify my email address. So check out your mailbox. You should have received an email that looks like that. That's being sent by Nhost by default without having to do it ourselves, which comes in handy. So click the verify email link. And if everything works fine, you should be fully authenticated and you should get access to your dashboard, but also the profile page. You can even log out from the application and log in again using your email and password. All right, now let's keep going and try to retrieve the data of the current authenticated user and display it throughout his dashboard. So open up the layout.js file and import the use user data hook from Nhost and call it inside your component to retrieve the current user object. And that's it. All the JSX code for rendering the user's data, email, display name, and so on is already included in your components as part of the template you have bootstrapped at the beginning of this tutorial. If you check out your application again, you can see that we have the first name of the current user display on the home page and all the other information on the user's menu. We have his profile picture, his display name, and email address. And in the profile page, the default value of the form should also be populated with the user's data. Great. Now let's see how to update the user's data from this form. So to do so, we're going to use the GraphQL API that Nhost provides through Asura so that we can query and mutate our data instantly. And in this tutorial, we will use the Apollo GraphQL client for interacting with this GraphQL API. So start by installing Nhost React Apollo and the Apollo client. Then open your app.js file. Import the Nhost Apollo provider at the top and wrap your JSX inside that provider. Also make sure to include this provider below the Nhost React provider. So now we are done with the Apollo client configuration. So let's construct our GraphQL API inside the profile page. Start by importing the useMutation hook and the GQL method from Apollo. Also import the toast method from React Toast that we'll use to notify the user about the results of the mutation query. Right, next, create your GraphQL mutation. Here we're using the update user method provided by the GraphQL API and we are updating the display name and the metadata of the user whose ID is passed as an argument. Now that we have our query, let's scroll down inside our component and use the use mutation hook with that query. It's important to note that the use mutation won't actually perform the mutation, but it will return a function that we can use to actually trigger this mutation, along with a loading variable to check the current status of the mutation. And then inside the update user profile method, trigger the mutation by calling the mutate user function. And don't forget to pass all the necessary variables, which are the user ID, the display name, and the metadata that we want to update. And if everything works fine, display a success message to the user. And in case something goes wrong, display an error message to the user. Then scroll down to your JSX, disable all the inputs if our GraphQL mutation is currently running, and disable the submit button as well. Alright, one more thing. Since Arthura has an allow nothing by default policy, and because we haven't set any permission yet, our GraphQL mutation will fail. So open up your Nhost dashboard and open the data page, copy your secret key, and open the Arthura console. From here, enter the secret key and enter the console. From here, open the data tab, and then from the sidebar, open the users table, and then go to the permission tab. To create a new permission for our users, type in user in the role cell and click the edit icon on the select operation. To restrict the users to read his own data only, specify a custom condition with the user's ID equal to the Arthura user ID session variable, which is passed with each request. Next, scroll down and select the column you'd like the users to have access to. So metadata, display name, avatar URL, email address, and the ID, and save your permissions. Now let's do the same with the update operation for the user role to allow users to update their display name and metadata. So use the same custom check as the select operation and allow the role to access only the metadata and the display name column. And save your permissions. Alright, so now let's try it. So now I should be able to update my first and last name successfully. That's perfect. But if you check the users menu, you can see that our application state is not in sync with our database anymore. That's because after running our GraphQL mutation, we haven't updated our React state that's being used by user menu to display the user information. So to fix that, instead of using the Nhost React hook to retrieve our user's data, we are going to use our GraphQL API using the Apollo client so we can cache and synchronize automatically our server state with our React application. Alright, so let's go back to our code editor and open the layout components. Here, import the use query hook from the Apollo client and the GQL function, and replace the use user metadata hook with the use user ID hook from Nhost, as we're going to need the user ID to run our query. Then create your GraphQL query to retrieve the user ID, email, display name, metadata, and avatar URL. Then inside your layout component, retrieve the user ID with the new hook, call the useQuery hook with your GraphQL query, passing the user ID. As a result of that query, you should get the user's data or an error if something goes wrong. And finally, inside your JSX, display a message if we get an error from our query. Otherwise, display the rest of the application by passing the user's data to the React context, or null if the query is still loading. Now, if you check out the applications once again, so you can see I've refreshed the page, everything is in sync. And if I change my first and last name again, click update, you still see that our React state has also been updated in result to our GraphQL mutation, thanks to the Apollo client that is caching and synchronizing everything for us. Alright, so that's it. That's the end of this tutorial. Congratulations, you now have a fully functional React application powered by the Nhost that provides us a serverless Postgre database, the GraphQL API that comes with it, the authentication, and all the React hooks to talk to those services. Definitely check out the links in the description below if you want to know more about Nhost or if you want to get access to the source code of this application. Thank you very much and see you next time for another tutorial. And remember, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you.